she stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but grief and a deed to land nobody wanted.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories' new emotional tales every day.
The stagecoach came to a slow, grinding halt at the edge of Copper Springs, a town so small that most maps forgot to include it. Miriam Blackwood stepped down onto the dusty street, her black mourning dress catching the autumn wind. She carried nothing but a single carpet bag, and a heart so heavy she wondered how she remained standing. 3 months ago, she had been the wife of a prosperous merchant in Boston. 2 months ago, scarlet fever had taken her husband Thomas. 6 weeks ago, she discovered he had left her with nothing but debts and broken promises. 4 weeks ago, she had sold everything she owned to pay what was owed. And now, at 32 years old, she stood in a town where no one knew her name, wondering why she had even bothered to make the journey west. Her sister had lived here once, years ago, before she too had passed from this world. Miriam had found the deed to a small piece of land among her sister's belongings, and it seemed as good a place as any to disappear. She had no plans beyond today, no dreams beyond this moment. She simply existed, putting one foot in front of the other, because she did not know what else to do. The main street of Copper Springs stretched before her like a painting of another time. Wooden buildings lined both sides, their facades weathered by sun and wind. A general store stood at one corner. A church steeple rose in the distance, and somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer rang out a steady rhythm. Miriam began walking toward the land office, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. People paused to look at her, this stranger in mourning clothes, but she kept her eyes forward. She had learned that meeting people's gazes only invited conversation, and she had nothing left to say. The land office was a small building with a crooked sign hanging above the door. Inside, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from a pile of papers. "Help you, ma'am." Miriam placed the deed on his desk. "I am looking for this property. It belonged to my sister, Rose Whitmore. She passed 3 years ago, and I have come to claim what is mine." The man studied the deed, then studied her face, then looked back at the deed again. "Whitmore land. Yes, I remember now. Good piece of property, about 2 miles north of town. Little farmhouse on it, though. I cannot say what condition it might be in. Nobody has lived there since your sister passed. That is fine. I simply need somewhere to stay." He gave her directions, and Miriam set out on foot. 2 miles was nothing compared to the distance she had traveled to get here. The road north was quiet, lined with cottonwood trees whose leaves had begun to turn gold. In another life, she might have found it beautiful. Now, she simply walked. The farmhouse appeared around a bend in the road, and Miriam stopped to take it in. It was smaller than she had imagined, with a sagging porch and windows clouded with years of dust. The garden had grown wild, and the fence surrounding the property had collapsed in several places. But it was hers, the first thing that had been truly hers in longer than she could remember. She pushed open the gate and walked toward the house, her footsteps echoing on the wooden porch. The door opened with a protest of rusty hinges, and she stepped inside. It smelled of dust and abandonment, but beneath that, she caught traces of her sister. The curtains Rose had sewn, the rocking chair Rose had loved, the small kitchen where Rose had once baked bread and dreamed of the future. Miriam set down her carpet bag and stood in the center of the room, allowing herself to feel the weight of all she had lost. Her husband, her home, her sister, her parents, gone years before. Her dreams of children that had never come. Everything she had built her life around had crumbled to nothing, and she stood here now in this empty house, an empty woman in an empty room. She did not cry. She had no tears left. She simply stood there until the light began to fade, and then she lay down on her sister's old bed, without bothering to eat or light a lamp, and she closed her eyes against the darkness. The morning came whether she wanted it to or not. Miriam rose, splashed water on her face from a pump that still worked, and tried to decide what to do next. She had enough money to survive for perhaps 2 months if she was careful. After that, she had no idea. A knock at the door startled her so badly that she nearly dropped the tin cup in her hand. She opened it to find a man standing on her porch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore the clothes of a working man, and he held his hat in his hands with an expression of uncertainty on his face. "Ma'am, I apologize for disturbing you. My name is Silas Crawford. I have the farm next to yours, about half a mile east. I saw smoke from your chimney this morning and wanted to make sure everything was all right. Nobody has lived here for years." Miriam realized she must look a sight, still in her wrinkled morning dress, her hair escaping its pins. "I am Miriam Blackwood. Rose Whitmore was my sister. I have come to claim her property." Understanding softened his features. Mrs. Whitmore was a fine woman. The whole town mourned when she passed. "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Silas shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I wanted to offer my help if you need it. That fence needs mending, and the roof has a few spots that might leak come winter. I have some time before the harvest comes in, and I would be happy to assist a neighbor." Then he made them pay. This is their story. Something in his tone suggested this was not easy for him, that he was a man more comfortable with silence than with words. Miriam found herself studying his face, seeing the lines that spoke of years spent working under an open sky, the weathered hands that knew honest labor. "I could not ask you to do that." "You did not ask. I offered. There is a difference." She considered refusing. She had come here to be alone, to fade quietly into the background of this small town, until she figured out what came next. But the practical part of her knew she could not fix this place by herself, and his offer came without expectation, without pity. It was simply one neighbor helping another. "All right. Thank you, Mr. Crawford." He nodded once, put his hat back on his head, and said he would return the next morning with his tools. True to his word, Silas arrived at dawn the following day. Miriam watched from the kitchen window as he unloaded lumber and supplies from his wagon, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. She put on coffee and brought him a cup, which he accepted with a nod of thanks. For 3 weeks he came every morning. He mended the fence, he patched the roof, he fixed the steps on the porch, and replaced the broken window in the bedroom. And slowly, through work rather than words, he began to draw her out of herself. She learned that he had come to Copper Springs 15 years ago, following the death of his wife in childbirth. The baby had not survived either. He had left everything behind in Missouri and started over in this small corner of the world, building his farm from nothing, learning to live with the silence that followed loss. "Some days," he said, one afternoon, pausing in his work to look out at the horizon, "the quiet was so loud I thought it might drive me mad. But then I found that if I kept my hands busy, my mind could rest, and eventually, the days started to feel a little lighter." Miriam understood exactly what he meant. She began cooking meals for him, partly as payment for his work, and partly because it gave her something to do. She discovered that she remembered how to make her mother's recipes, dishes she had not prepared in years, and she found that feeding someone, caring for someone, filled a hollow space inside her that she had forgotten existed. One evening, as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun go down, Silas turned to her with something like nervousness in his eyes. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You may." "When you first came here, you looked like someone who had given up, like you were just waiting for something, but I could not figure out what. But lately, you seem different. What changed?" Miriam considered the question for a long moment. "Honestly, when I stepped off that stagecoach, I was not sure I wanted to keep going. I had lost everything that made my life make sense. My husband, my home, my place in the world. I came here because I did not know where else to go. and I thought maybe I would just fade away. Nobody would miss me. Nobody would even notice. Her voice caught, and she had to pause before continuing. But then you knocked on my door, and you offered to help. Not because you wanted something from me, but because it was the right thing to do. And every day you came back, I started to remember that the world still had good people in it, that maybe I still had something to offer. Silas was quiet for so long that she thought perhaps she had said too much. But then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. After Caroline died, I thought my life was over. I could not imagine ever feeling anything again, except pain. But time has a way of healing wounds, if we let it. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, we find someone who understands our pain because they carry their own. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that neither of them could have named. It was not romance, not yet. It was recognition. Two broken souls seeing their own reflection in each other. The weeks turned into months. Autumn gave way to winter, and the first snows fell on Copper Springs. Miriam's farmhouse was warm now, repaired and cared for, and she had planted bulbs in the garden that would bloom come spring. Silas still came by, nearly every day, though now there was no repair work to justify his visits. They simply enjoyed each other's company, two people who had learned that silence could be shared as easily as conversation. He brought her books from the town library. She taught him to play chess. They read poetry, aloud by the fire, and debated the merits of different philosophers. The townspeople began to talk, as townspeople always do. The widow from the east and the quiet farmer. Some whispered that it was unseemly for them to spend so much time together. Others smiled knowingly and placed bets on when the wedding would be. Miriam tried not to think about what was growing between them. She told herself that she was simply grateful for a friend, that her heart was too damaged to love again. But when Silas walked into a room, she felt herself straighten. When he laughed at something she said, she felt warmth spread through her chest. And when he had to miss a visit because of work on his farm, the day felt endless without him. The day felt endless without him. It was December when everything changed. A blizzard had swept through the region, trapping everyone in their homes for 3 days. Miriam had enough supplies to survive, but by the second day she found herself standing at the window, looking toward Silas's farm with a worry she could not explain. What if something had happened to him? What if he was hurt or ill, with no one to help? On the third day, when the snow finally stopped falling, she bundled herself in every piece of warm clothing she owned and set out for his farm. The journey that normally took 15 minutes took over an hour, fighting through drifts that came up to her waist, but she kept going, driven by something stronger than logic. When she finally reached his door, she was nearly frozen, barely able to lift her hand to knock. The door flew open, and Silas stood there with an expression of shock and fear. "Miriam, what are you doing here? You could have died in that snow. I had to know you were all right." He pulled her inside, sat her by the fire, wrapped blankets around her shoulders. His hands were shaking, whether from cold or emotion. She could not tell. "You foolish, wonderful woman." She could not tell. "Do you have any idea how scared I was? Looking at that storm and thinking of you alone in that house, I wanted to come to you so badly, but I knew I would never make it through." She looked up at him, this man who had become her whole world without her, even realizing it. "Silas, I need to tell you something." "Then tell me." "When I came to Copper Springs, I had nothing left. No hope, no dreams, no reason to keep breathing. But you gave me a reason. You showed me that even after everything falls apart, something new can grow. You taught me how to live again." Tears were streaming down her face now, melting the frost that clung to her cheeks. "I love you. I did not mean to, and I do not expect anything in return, but I needed you to know." Silas knelt before her, taking her frozen hands in his warm his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Miriam, I have loved you since the moment you opened that door, looking like a woman who had walked through fire and survived. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you fight against your own happiness. Because you think you do not deserve it. I love the way you laugh when you think no one is listening, and the way you talk to the birds in your garden, like they are old friends. He reached up to touch her face, brushing away her tears with gentle fingers. I thought I would never love anyone again after Caroline, but you proved me wrong. You showed me that a heart can heal, that love can return when we least expect it. What do we do now? He smiled, the first truly joyful smile she had ever seen on his face. Now we stop pretending. Now we build a life together. If you will have me, marry me, Miriam. Not because either of us needs saving, but because we are better together than we are apart. She laughed through her tears, the sound echoing off the walls of his small farmhouse. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her as the fire crackled nearby. Outside, the snow sparkled under a bright December sun, and the world was pure and clean and full of possibility. They married in the spring, in the little church with the crooked steeple, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends. Miriam wore her sister's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers from her garden. Silas wore a new suit he had ordered from the catalog, looking uncomfortable but happy. After the ceremony, they stood on the porch of their new home, watching the sun set over the land they would build their future on. Silas had moved into Miriam's farmhouse because she had fallen in love with it, and he had fallen in love with her, which meant he loved everything she loved. He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Miriam leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong against her back. More than I ever thought possible. After I lost everything, I was so certain my life was over. I never imagined I would find a new beginning. Sometimes, Silas said softly, we have to lose everything before we can find what really matters. She turned in his arms and looked up at the man who had saved her without even trying. You were my reason to stay. And you, he replied, were my reason to start living again. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and two people who had thought their stories were over discovered that the best chapters were still to come, written together in the quiet corners of a small town called Copper Springs, where broken hearts came to heal, and second chances grew as wild as the prairie flowers. They would face challenges in the years ahead, as all couples do, but they would face them together, two souls who understood loss and learned to choose love anyway. And in the end, that was all that mattered. That was everything.